Well, Dan, great to be with you today
Thank you.
on behalf of Fintech Compliance Chronicles, and really excited to talk to you about an upcoming event that I know I'm very excited to attend. And what I understand is you're going to be organizing. You and I have known each other for a number of years, but this is a really interesting one you have here. This is the
Well, thanks
Fintech
for that.
Risk and Compliance Forum. Would love to, before we get into talking about the event, I'd love to just, have you tell our audience, our readers, a little bit about yourself. How did you go from, I think you had a background in treasury, then you became a serial entrepreneur. You've actually done some work as faculty. Then you became a speaker yourself, sometimes conferences, some other capacities, and now you're a conference host. So give us the story of Dan, if you will.
The meandering path, if you will, right? So you're right. I did start and Zarik, thanks so much for the opportunity to speak with you today. I appreciate it. Yeah, I started in treasury management, still work in treasury management, but I started as a practitioner working with within large organization treasury departments. And back in 2003, started a treasury management consulting company called Tresolution, which is actually the company that produces both the Fintech Risk and Compliance Forum and the US Fintech Symposium. So our company, Tresolution, what we do is we do treasury management consulting on one side of the coin, and on the other side of the coin, we do event production. So this year in June, we'll be hosting our 6th annual US Fintech Symposium. We're thrilled about that and really can't wait for that. But the genesis of the Fintech Risk and Compliance Forum actually was the US Fintech Symposium. Over the years, I had noticed that there were a lot of compliance and risk management professionals attending the US Fintech Symposium. Now, we had always had risk management and compliance tracks at the US Fintech Symposium. So last May in Orlando, we did a meetup at the conference with all of the risk and compliance people, and I essentially asked them, hey, if we created a conference that was specifically geared towards risk and compliance within fintech, is that something that would be of interest? And nearly everyone in the room indicated that there's a need for that, a specific need for fintech risk and compliance discussions. So that's what we did. We launched the Fintech Risk and Compliance Forum. Our first iteration will be this, just here in a couple of weeks, Zarik. Can't wait to network with you more in person at the event. But we're really, really thrilled about that. So that's a little bit of a background about who I am and how we came to develop the Fintech Risk and Compliance Forum.
No, that's great background, and I have to say I was certainly one of those attendees of the U.S. FinTech Symposium that was in the risk compliance audit space. And so,
I remember that.
as a previous attendee of the U.S. Symposium, I'm very excited and thankful that you developed what I believe is going to be the first time
Correct.
holding the FinTech Risk and Compliance Forum. So definitely, beyond just being the writer of this newsletter, I'm also as an attendee and somebody who's in the space, very interested in participating as well. So you talked a little bit about, how the forum came to be, how it sort of spun off, if you will, from the FinTech Symposium. But there's a lot of I know that when you talked about how the original conference, the U.S. FinTech Symposium, came to be based on your conversation with folks in the Treasury space. The Risk and Compliance Forum. Let's talk about that for a second. What makes that conference different from others out there? As our readers who are watching this will know, I recently scrolled through the schedule of 2024 and looked for all the different sort of risk and compliance fintech events, if you will, around the world. Some are in more niche topics, some are more general. So this is an opportunity, if you will, to sort of tout the credentials of this event, particularly as this is the first time you're holding this. I'd love to give you an opportunity to sort of distinguish this event from others. If you wouldn't mind just sharing
Sure.
what makes this event stand out in your mind.
Well, thanks. So I would categorize it in two manners. One is within its focus, and second is within its structure. So when it comes to the focus, the FinTech Risk and Compliance Forum is hyper focused on Fintech Risk and Compliance. There are risk management conferences out there. There are compliance and regulatory conferences that are out there, but they are a little bit more broad in scope, whereas the Fintech Risk and Compliance is really hyper-focused on fintech companies and financial institutions that are working with them and how to make that risk and compliance ecosystem work. That's the first. So that's how we are defining ourselves in the marketplace when it comes to the content of the event. In regards to its structure, it's a little bit different in the sense that we have 4 keynote panel discussions and then numerous peer-to-peer conversations. So what's missing from this is the presentation, right? Where there's one presenter in the front of the room talking to an audience. Well, when you host an event that is attended by senior level executives and people that have a tremendous amount of experience, the collective knowledge in the room is what needs to be tapped into. So that's why we're hosting these really great peer-to-peer conversations, all revolving around the latest fintech risk and compliance and regulatory issues. So we're really excited about that. So to answer your question, 1 is the focus, and then 2 is the structure of how we're going to be hosting this event this year.
Great, that's great. Now, on the location, so you briefly talked about Florida as a venue for the U.S. FinTech Symposium, and so you're in Chicago for the Fintech Risk and Compliance Forum.
No,
so
for both,
I'm
and
curious.
for U.S. FinTech too.
Oh, okay, yeah. So that was the lead to my question. You've been in the past when I first attended events of yours previously. It was in the Chicagoland area, and then you had mentioned Florida. I think you had done some other events in other locations at one point, but you're back in Chicago now, and it seems that both events in 2024 are going to be in Chicago. So, I lived in Chicagoland for 30 plus years, where I grew up. That's obviously where I attended your conference as well. And so, I certainly know the benefits and advantages of living in the area, but I'm curious from your perspective. What is it about the Chicagoland area, Oak Brook, just the region that keeps you coming back?
Right. So, I mean, you're right. We did move from Orlando back to Chicago, where the U.S. FinTech Symposium was originally held back in 2018 and 19. And the reason why, quite frankly, is there's just numerous reasons. 1, the quality of the venue, the uniqueness of the venue from which we'll be hosting these events. And then the third important thing is the ease of logistics of traveling, quite frankly. This is a national, international event. We have people coming in from all areas of the country. So travel logistics and making sure that people aren't spending a lot of time getting from one side of the US to the other makes a difference. So the central location of Chicago and the fact that the venue is a quick 20-minute drive from O'Hare or Midway Airport makes that wonderful when it comes to the ease of travel. And not only that, but being in Chicago, most of the time you can get a direct flight from pretty much anywhere in the country. So you're not taking any connecting flights, most likely. So that's issue number 1, is again trying to make this experience as great as possible for our attendees. But when we talk about the venue we found is really, really interesting. As you mentioned before, it's in Oak Brook, which is a western suburb of Chicago. And this venue itself is actually nestled within somewhat of like a forest preserve. And there's a lake that separates the hotel and the conference center. And there's a bridge that goes over the lake. So it's very much like a resort type setting, if you will. And we just found it to be a really tranquil, serene place to have some very serious conversations about fintech.
Fantastic, and I'm actually very excited as you described it. I'm trying to picture it in my head because I've been to and passed and even worked in Oak Brook at various points in my time in Chicago, but I've never actually been to this venue, so I'm looking forward to it myself. And I have to say, 100% agree with you on the centrality of Chicago being in the Midwest. And I'd say since I moved to the East Coast, I see much less of folks on the West Coast than I used to. I think like lucky if I see folks from LA or the Bay Area, more than once a year, to various events and
Sure.
activities. So in terms of the event, can you talk a little bit about some of the speakers and companies that are sponsoring the event that you're most excited about? I'm sure there's a number of speakers and a number of companies that are, supporting this event, including maybe even some, solutions providers that are going to be there. But if you could just name a few that you feel are really, really exciting to you, that you think the attendees and participants are going to be really interested to know about.
Sure. Well, I mean, first and foremost, in regards to the sponsors, we're happy for all of our sponsors, quite frankly, because these are organizations that are coming and supporting this mission that we have of bringing senior level executives together to drive their fintech risk and compliance strategies for the next 12 months, right? So to pick one would be unfair to all of the other ones. They're all wonderful in my eyes, quite frankly. But when it comes to the sessions and the topics and what I'm most excited for, I mean, I think really it's the audience and the registrants that I'm most excited for because of the peer-to-peer conversations, because of the senior level executives that are coming in, the experience and the opinions that they're bringing to the table. That I think is going to be the a game changer, if you will, when having these conversations. But if you wanted to talk a little bit about the panelists, for instance, I'm really excited about our regulator panel. We have representatives from the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago and the OCC and former OCC representatives moderating that panel. So that's going to be fascinating because it's the regulators actually sharing and talking about these topics directly. But when you start looking at the other panel discussions we have, like our CRO panel discussion, we have the former Chief Risk Officer of the New York Fed on our opening keynote panel. That's going to be fascinating. Or you can go back to our CCO panel, our Chief Compliance Officer panel, where it's comprised of all current large fintech CCOs. This is hearing directly from them what their best practices are and what their challenges they're facing are going to be or are currently are. So all of that is what I'm excited for. And I know that's a generalized answer. I know you were looking for specifics, Zarik, but it's really tough. I'm just gonna say I'm looking forward to the whole thing. But of course I would say that though, wouldn't I?
I think you gave the best possible answer for our readers specifically, because as folks who follow our newsletter know, we're hyper focused on what the regulators are thinking, what the regulators are doing. So just hearing about the regulator panel in particular, I'm sure is going to pique the interest of people who follow our publication. So I think, if you're on the fence, or especially if you live in the Chicago area and you're thinking about this event, hopefully that is enough to, sell you on the idea of attending this event. So, speaking of, some of the panels and, just want to shift to the topic. So I know, when I was going through the registration, I saw a number of different topics that actually came up as part of the peer-to-peer sessions.
Right.
And so that actually led to some curiosity in my mind. We talked a little bit about, the forums, the events, the panels as part of the conference, but I'm curious, like the topic that you had in mind. So it's definitely an interesting range and selection of topics that you had in mind for the peer-to-peer sessions. And I'm sure there's going to be, equally interesting, sessions for more of the panel discussions as well. But I'm curious, as you were sort of planning and curating this event, what were some of the most critical issues in the risk and compliance space that stood out to you? Particularly when we talk about fintech, we're talking about banking, payments, finance. So how were you able to take all these, issues that you feel have been most critical and incorporate them into the event's agenda?
So it's a little bit of a combination of very specific topics coupled with general topics. And the reason why it's structured in that manner is because I don't want to be presumptuous and think that I know exactly what needs to be discussed at a conference like this. So in order to really tap into the latest developments and again, the experience that's in the room, you need that sort of a mix between the two. So an example would be, we have a panel discussion, or I'm sorry, a peer-to-peer discussion on Regulation E. We have one on cybersecurity. We have one on BSA and AML. So those are very specific topics, if you will. But on the other hand, we also have the state of fintech in 2024 and beyond. That's another peer-to-peer discussion. So that would be an example of a more generalized peer-to-peer discussion. And the reason why it's structured in that manner is because we need to have room and space to talk about things that, quite frankly, I hadn't thought about when creating the agenda. So enabling the audience to bring up topics that, again, that I may not have thought of that still need to be discussed at an event like this.
That's actually something I wanted to hone in on, which I found to be really refreshing. And in fact, I felt a sense of that, even though it wasn't the Risk and Compliance Forum. When I first attended the US Fintech Symposium, I really appreciate that when you put your events together, it isn't just a rigid format and the audience sort of, goes along for the ride. The audience, has an opportunity to some degree to shape, how this event is going to come together, sometimes even in real time, which I think is another unique selling point, for this conference compared to others. So, as we come, close to the end of our conversation, think about various conferences I've been to in the past, whether fintech related, compliance related, risk audit, some other type of conference. These events are held, and then, once folks are out, they're really motivated, they're energized, and then they get back to their job, they open up their emails, and suddenly all the learnings and all the excitement and energy just goes out the window, and they start scrolling through all the emails that they missed, all the meetings that they need to hold to get caught up on. And so, that tends to happen, no matter how, positive one's intentions are. But, there's still ways, I think, that folks who attend events can find something to take away that they can hang on to more permanently. So from your perspective, as folks attend and then, leave the Fintech Risk and Compliance Forum, what do you think is the best way that attendees and participants can ensure that whatever they experience, whatever they learn, when they leave the event, they can retain it?
Sure. So that's a great question, and we're laser focused on both of our events on making sure that there are tangible takeaways from these conversations, and that one, innovative conversations are happening, and two, that the speakers and the audience and everyone that's involved with the sessions understand that we're looking to make this a valuable time spent for everyone involved. So one of the specific ways that we're going to do this with the Fintech Risk and Compliance Forum this year is all of the peer-to-peer sessions are actually going to be recorded and transcribed. And we will then thereafter create a 1 or 2 page white paper summary of the conversation that was had and email that out to the participants of that peer-to-peer session. So we really, again, we're focused on tangible takeaways, making sure that there's meaningful conversations that are happening, and documenting the best practices and the conversations that are had in the room itself. Because again, it's the collective knowledge of the audience that is really adding value to this. And we feel that if we're able to create that white paper and give it back to the audience, that's a meaningful way for them to document and to remember the conversations that we're having.
Fantastic. And I'm excited for that white paper myself. I think it's going to be a great source of learning for me and, hopefully any of our readers that attend for them as well. So just in closing, do you have any final thoughts or comments, that you would like to share with the readers of Fintech Compliance Chronicles?
Well, no, I want to thank you, Zarik, for this opportunity to talk with you today and to share a little bit more information about this event. We do have a mission of bringing senior level executives together to drive their strategies for the next 12 months, whether it be in fintech or specifically within risk and compliance and regulation. So if any of your readers are interested in achieving any of those goals, you can visit either fintechriskandcompliance.com or fintechsymposium.com to learn about either of the 2 events that we produce.
Yep. So just repeat those one more time: fintechriskandcompliance.com or fintechsymposium.com. Check out those websites, and it's been my pleasure to spend time with Dan Carmody. Thank you very much, Dan. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Zarik. It's always nice talking with you. We'll talk soon.
Talk to you soon.